So this is the fourth night in the series about views. So I'm going to talk a bit about right view tonight. The title I've been given is Views that Celebrate Difference. So I'm going to sort of riff around that kind of that topic. So yeah, I'll just say a bit about the series as a whole. So the series as a whole is in a way looking at this arc of wrong view, right view, and no view. Yeah. So it's looking at how they relate to each other and how these views affect the area of our interaction with others. So, and it's exploring how to avoid falling out with others, and if we do, well, how to get back into communication. Yeah. So that's the sort of arc we're exploring here, really. And so I want to explore right view. I want to explore it from three angles, really. So firstly, seeing it's week 4, I want to briefly recap on what's gone before. In a way, so far, we've been looking more wrong view and seeing how that causes difficulties. So if we can let go, if we can see our own wrong views or see wrong views and be able to let go of them, then that sort of opens up a space for right view. So what's gone before is really helpful in as a precursor to exploring right view. Yeah. So firstly, I'm going to do that. Then I want to look at right view from another angle, in a way from the perspective of the Buddha, of the enlightened mind. Now, we can't really go quite there to that experience, but I'm just going to sort of try and explore what it might be like for someone like the Buddha who maybe is characterized as having no view, what it's like for him or someone with that experience. How do they communicate, and what can that tell us about right view? Yeah. And then finally, thirdly, I'd like to look at right view a bit more directly and try and understand a bit more what right view is about, how we might discern what is right view. That's what I'd like to do. So just to say, I'll be stopping as certain stages as we go through, just to see if there are any questions. But if you haven't understood what I've said, do put your hand up and chip in, and hopefully we can sort that out. Yeah. Good. So we've had talks previously from Arthur Siddhi and Kulapriya, and Yashodhaka was exploring how to approach wrong views or how to unearth wrong views last week. So when we're talking about views, in this sense, we use the term views. Well, Arthur Siddhi clarified that we don't just mean opinions. It's not just ideas in a way. It's much more deeper than that, what's been getting at here. He clarified that, in a way, views go deeper, and in a way the term he uses, they're operative in the way we perceive the world. Yeah. So it's, in a way, the views are like a pair of glasses that we sometimes we don't even know we have a pair of glasses. And we interpret the world through that view. So in a sense, you can almost say that we create the world through our views. Yeah. So views go much deeper. And then Kulapriya, the second week, he talked about views as, well, almost like you could describe them as, goes a bit deeper. They're like a belief. Yeah, something that goes a bit deeper. It's almost an orientation of the way we perceive the world. Yeah. So they're much deeper than just ideas. Yeah. So in talking about views, this is a translation of the ancient Indian Pali word ditti, or in Sanskrit, dristi. So I thought, well, I'd look up that word. It's always good to look up these words and try and draw out a bit more their meaning. So it says that ditti means view, a belief, an opinion, a theory, a doctrine. And there's a suggestion the views are often the suggestion is that the views are sort of not quite right. They're wrong. They're false views. Yeah. So this is what, when we're talking about views here, is a translation of this word ditti or dristi in Sanskrit. Yeah. So when you read the literature around this, the suggestion is, as I say, that we have a whole complex of views. Yeah. So on the surface, I was thinking this, it's on the surface, you might have an opinion. It might be an opinion which is a considered one that you've thought through and taken on. Or as Katuraja was saying, it might be an opinion that you've just, as it were, taken off the peg, as it were. You haven't really thought about it, but you've just adopted it for one reason or another. But as I say, I think we have a whole complex of views on different levels. And I think that's quite interesting. Some are conscious, some of them are aware, some of them are semi-conscious, some of them are not very conscious at all. Again, Yeshadaka was talking last week about some views that he sort of unearthed as he was writing his talk. As we reflect, and as we reflect on the Dharma, we sometimes become aware of views that we're unaware of. You know, it may be, I can't change. I can't change. I don't really believe in this change. And sometimes views like that, we're not quite aware of. So part of the practice here is to become more deeply aware of the views, the wrong views that hinder us and that get in the way. So the Buddha talked about a web of views, or even a thicket of views. I really like that idea of a thicket of views. It's a bit like you imagine you're in a jungle or a tropical jungle, and you know, and initially it might seem, you know, attractive. There's lovely fruits and lovely plants. As you try and move forward, you know, there's sort of razor sharp leaves, and there's brambles with big thorns that sort of stick in your arms. It makes you difficult to move forward. So in a way, that's the kind of image that the Buddha is giving when he talks about a thicket of views. Yeah, like brambles. And so moving on, I'll just lift up this chart. We talked about this arc of views, and we've talked about there being levels of views, a complex of views. And we have opinions, unconscious views. But I want to just, before we move on to the next point, I wanted to sort of draw out a teaching that comes from the Yogacara school of Buddhism, particular school of Buddhism. And the Yogacara says that underneath, or right at the sort of base level of this sort of complex, this thicket of views, are some sort of fundamental wrong views. And the Yogacara suggests that we're sort of born with these. They're a bit innate. It's not to say that we can't overcome them, but they're quite deep. They're quite deep there. So I don't want to go into these in too much detail, but I just identify them here. So there's, well, one thing that Katuraja talked about a couple of weeks ago, he talked about conceit. Now, this isn't just the conceit of someone might be conceited about their qualities. It's this conceit of self is, we tend to, it acknowledges that we tend always to be comparing ourselves with others. So we either think we're superior in one way or another to someone else, or we're inferior, or we're comparing ourselves, we think we're equal, we're about the same. So that's happening, seems to be happening a lot of the time. Yeah, we sort of want to find our place, our identity, our place. So this is and it's all these are reinforcing a sense of a separate self. Yeah. So there's the conceit of self, and then there's self-love or affection or attachment. So there's that self-love, and one aspect of these is it's not as though they're all these. It's not as though they're wrong in a sense of there's good aspects to these. Maybe I'll just leave it there. But again, there's an attachment to self as a separate self, as a separate individual existing being. So there's self-love or self-affection, self-attachment, deceit, and then there's these two other bits here. One is ignorance in the sense of not knowing the way things are. And there's an element in this of not really wanting to know as well. And then there's views of an abiding self. So there are views, lots of views that come out of a sense of that there is a separate self. So I hope I haven't opened a can of worms with these, because I could go on and exploring these. I find this fascinating. But I'm mainly drawing out this. I think the Yogacara has something interesting to say here, is that views have a cognitive element. So there are ideas, there's ideas. It might be the wrong view that I'll live forever, or when I die, I'll go to heaven and I'll live eternally. My soul will live eternally. Buddhism views that as a wrong view. So there's ideas, there's a sort of cognitive element, but there's also an emotional element, an affective element. And personally, I think that's really important when we're exploring new views, that we acknowledge that there are those two elements. So when we're exploring wrong views, or maybe looking at our own wrong views, I think it's important to both note the content of our view, what the cognitive element, but also the way we're holding it, the way we're grasping onto views. There's even the element that the content of a view might be, correct in a certain way, but if we hold on to a view, even a good view, very, very tight, then that can not help us and not help others. So there's how we hold on to things as well as the content. Yeah. One of the things that are reflecting on this is this the affective element is important. That actually wrong views can sort of almost like poison us and cause suffering, basically. Anyway, I'll come back to that later. So, okay, we've got these wrong views. How do we work with those? How do we actually work with wrong views, or unearth them, as it were, become more aware of them and help ourselves to let them go? Well, the classic teaching of Buddhism is the threefold way, and one can apply that here to wrong views. So ethics, meditation, and wisdom. Yeah. So when Kula Priya was giving his talk, he asked some very good questions in the second half of his talk, I thought. He asked, well, how do you know whether it's a wrong view? And he said, well, does it accord with the precepts? He said, it's not, you may really feel a view is right. You may even feel really strongly that a view is right, but that doesn't necessarily mean it is. So he pointed out that the precepts are a very good way of, does this view accord with the precepts? So I think that's a good way of bringing an awareness, a mindfulness to our own views in terms of exploring our own views. I think that's really important. There's mindfulness and a sort of kindness and a care and metta towards ourselves when we are exploring our views. Because in a way, they aren't just sort of neutral, the views, they form our identity, really, yeah. So ethics is maybe the start of a good way of clarifying what are wrong views. But on the basis of aligning ourselves with the precepts, our meditation deepens and our mind becomes clearer and more pliant. And then on the basis of being able to developing our awareness and seeing things a bit more deeply, well, then that allows us to see through this sort of complex of views and maybe even get down to seeing these more basic views on which a lot of other views are built up. Yeah. So just going back to this Yogacara view, these are seen as potentially innate. But on top of these, the Yogacara says, on top of these, we accumulate a whole load of other views that are particular to our conditioning and our upbringing. So the Yogacara sees that we need to work from understanding what our views are and working through them, and eventually it's only really after getting through and seeing our views more clearly that we're able to get down to these more innate views that are based around seeing ourselves as separate. Okay, I probably talked more than enough in terms of that first bit, the first thing of wrong views. But as we begin to see our wrong views, we sort of come into a bit of a clearing, I think. So we've been in the jungle, but we sort of find ourselves out on maybe a beach in front of a river, say, and begin to feel the sunlight on our face. We can see a bit more broadly. So that enables us to sort of be able to attend to and approach right view more easily, as it were. Okay, so and also in relation to our connections with other people, our dialogue, our interactions with other people, if we can be clearer about our own views, then it's easier to entertain the alternative views of others. If we're very attached to our views and our identity is very built around views, then it's really difficult to just open up and see that there may be alternative perspectives. So working through and clarifying what our views are, maybe letting go of them when that's appropriate, we're able to consider alternative views more objectively. And we don't react quite so quickly. And it may be that we still maintain the content of our views, but we maybe hold them a bit more lightly. Okay, well, that's more than enough on just recapping on wrong view. So what I want to do now is to approach right view from the perspective of the Buddha, or try to do that. You know, it's quite difficult to get a sense of how did the Buddha see things, yeah. But the Buddha is often characterized as having no view, yeah. The tradition says the Buddha has, another way of saying it, the Buddha has perfect vision. So what does that mean? One way of looking at that is the Buddha sees things directly. He sees that everything is conditioned arising. It's not just that he sees it, because that sort of sense that he's withdrawn from it, but he's there in it, as it were, and he's aware that he is part of those conditions. So yeah, it's quite difficult to get your head around this, what this perfect vision or no view is like. Fortunately, that's not my topic. So in a couple of weeks, Padma Vajra is going to be here, and I think he's much more and a much more appropriate person to try to tackle that subject. Yeah. But what I'm interested in, what I'm really interested in this is what happens when a Buddha, an enlightened mind, interacts with others. Yeah. What happens there? Yeah. Now, you really see these encounters. There's lots of them in the Pali Canon. That's a great thing we have of this sort of canonical tradition. And what we see is the Buddha meeting all sorts of people, men, women, princes, kings, people who are just on the street, farmers, potters, all sorts of people. And I really love these stories, and they give you a bit of an idea of who the Buddha is. And particularly, I really enjoy the interactions. And I'm just trying to, in a way, draw out what they mean, what they tell us about right view, really. The stories are quite detailed. They tell you who the person was, what their profession was, where the Buddha met them, and what's going on for the person, what kind of doesn't talk in these terms. What is the conditioning of that person? What's their standing? What's their culture? And the thing that in each one of these encounters that the Buddha has, the first thing he does is really connect with the person. That's before any views or any teachings come out. He really connects with the person. So he really wants to know about their life. He asks them about their life. And he then only moves on to talking about ideas and the Dharma on the basis of really connecting with them. Yeah. And he uses terms and examples that will be understood by that person. So he doesn't just say, automatically talk about the Noble Eightfold Path or this or that. He relates to the person as a person, and he uses terms which were meaningful for them. If it's a potter, he might talk about how pots are molded, and how we're conditioned in that way. A lovely sutta that I like is, I think it's the Abhayaraja Kumar Sutta, and it's a prince, and he has a son, and so the son is sitting on his knee as the Buddha talks to him, and he uses the example of the son. So he uses what's there in front. So he says to him, if your son had swallowed a bone or stick or something, and he was going to choke and he was maybe even going to die, what would you do? The prince says, well, I'd take it out. And the Buddha said, would that cause your son some pain? He said, well, yes, it would, but it's much better to take that bone out of the mouth. And then he goes on, I won't tell the whole story, but he uses that as an illustration. He's got the attention of Abhayaraja Kumar. He's got his attention, and he communicates in a way that his interlocutor is going to remember and is meaningful to him. So I think in talking about this, I want to draw out in a way that while there are common principles of the Dharma, actually the important thing is, and in a way, right view is addressed to the individual, and it's personal to that person, So the Buddha doesn't teach one thing; he teaches a variety of things that are appropriate to the person and appropriate to the person at that time. Yeah. So, so just saying a bit more, what unfolds, I think, in these dialogues is the Buddha both comes from his experience and he also directs the people he talks to their experience. And he comes with a desire to alleviate their suffering. So he presents an argument, he presents teachings, he presents right view, if you like, that directs them to their own experience. He doesn't say, just take it on my word. He says, try this out in your experience. Yeah, he says, if you do this, if you act in this way, will this lead to your suffering or will this lead to your happiness? So he asks people, he asks people to try it out in their own experience. So his teaching is conditional. He says, what I say is, if you do this, this will happen, and try it out for yourself. So instead of saying, take on this theory, this idea, he says, try this out and check it out in your own experience. So in this way, right view, the right view that's presented by the Buddha in his encounters is particular to them. It unfolds from being within a deep understanding of that everything is conditioned. So he comes from new view and he presents right view. What is helpful? What is useful to that particular person in that particular circumstance? I mean, of course, when you look at these stories, there are also times when the Buddha doesn't find a receptive, responsive person, sometimes they just, they just walk off, as it were. And in these cases, it's interesting to note that the Buddha says, okay, fine. He doesn't get upset. He's not attached to the view he's presenting. So there's something there, really. And it's interesting, I think, that the teachings that the Buddha give are instrumental. Their method, often presented with a lot of humor and irony. Often he says, people say, I really want to do this. And he says, well, you must do what you think the time is right for. And you can imagine some of this. I'm told by translators of the Pali that a lot of this is lost in translation, but apparently, like in the canon, there's a lot of humor. Okay, but it illustrates that the Buddha isn't attached to his teaching in the way, or is not attached to people taking it on board or not. That's not to say that the Buddha doesn't sometimes meet someone's energy. If someone is angry or something, he's not necessarily angry, but he meets that energy. Yeah, he's able to do that. The Buddha isn't a pushover, as you'll see if you read some of these suttas. And sometimes he plays the long game. So sometimes he'll say something and someone will go off, but then they'll come back and say, oh, you know what you were talking about. So he connects with them in the long run sometimes. Okay. So I've said a bit about wrong view and how letting go of wrong view opens up a space so it's easier to discern, well, what is right view, what helps us to move forward. And I think the Buddha and the stories of encounters with others gives a good example of right view coming out of something deeper, coming out of a direct experience. So hopefully, lastly, I just want to draw out a few ways maybe we can approach right view a bit more directly, really. These are 5 points. I'm going to make 5 points. And I'm just going to touch on them briefly. These are there's one of my own here, and I've drawn these out from Subhuti. And so I'm developing a few points that he made on this topic. So firstly, and I've touched on this already, right view is that which directs the spiritual aspirant to their own experience. This is really important. So the Buddha helps someone to be, he teaches meditation, he helps someone to be present with their own experience. Often we're restless and we're sliding off our own experience. But through meditation, the Buddha helps us, the teachings of meditation helps us to be present. And on that basis, the teachings point us to our own experience. So, there might be the principle that actions have consequences. Yeah. And the Buddha says, don't take it from me, check that out in your experience. In a way, this is something that Subhuti often said. He says, try and prove it wrong. I think that's quite a good way of approaching some of the key teachings. Try and prove it wrong. See if you can find the self. Where is it? Where is it in your experience? So right view points us to our experience, points us back to our experience. So in the case of actions have consequences, the Buddha directs us to look at our actions of body, speech, and mind. The result, do they result in openness, contentment, happiness, or the opposite to these? So as I say, the Buddha avoids dogma, he avoids ideology. Where he does use theory, because he has ideas, he has frameworks, but all of those are really method, that they're really to point us back to our own experience and go deeper and deeper with that awareness. So that's the first point I wanted to make. So secondly, right view attends to all the information available in a situation. Yeah. So this is a way how to maybe discern, is this a right view? So right view looks at things in the round. It takes into consideration all the factors involved without a sort of emotional bias, without preconception, prior assumptions, predetermined biases. So right view gives wise attention to the different facets of the situation. There's a lot more I could say about wise attention. That's a particular term, but I won't go into it here. But I think what is important is in any situation, there's an onus for us to try and look at things from different perspectives, as many perspectives as possible. Yeah. And if one does that, in time, I think one can discern, well, what kind of perspective is most useful in this particular situation? Yeah. For me, I've been reflecting on this quality of that some people have of being able to look at things. It's an imaginative capacity, I think, an empathetic capacity to imagine how other people are coming at a particular issue, and really enter into that different perspective. That's not easy, but being flexible, being able to do that in a flexible way, I think is really important in order to discern, well, what's helpful, what's right view in a particular circumstance. Lastly, within this point, I wanted to mention, well, Subhuti mentions this point of, in a way, to look at all the factors in a situation. One mustn't be biased by whether something is painful or whether it's pleasant or painful. You can be influenced in how you view something by whether something is enjoyable, pleasant, or painful. There's an association. So a little practice I've been doing here, a bit controversial, but I've got to mention politics, party politics briefly. So so what I've been trying to do is, I won't give details, but if you tend to associate yourself with one political party, it can be quite difficult to objectively assess a policy from another political party, even though that policy on its own might be quite good. So what I've been trying to do myself is to look at things, particular policy, and try and evaluate them fairly, and see the good aspects of that policy, even though where it comes from or the whole set of views I don't particularly agree with. So that just gives you, it's a little bit of a, that's my own practice, I'm not recommending that, but it's just like trying to see things from different angles and trying to evaluate things objectively. So that one was right view attends to all the information available in the situation. So thirdly, right view, third one is right view stays close to some essential experience that we all have, really. And in particular, it stays close to an awareness of impermanence, insubstantiality, and this sort of the inability to find lasting satisfaction in the things of life. Not only those three, traditionally called the three lakshanas, but it's also stays close to that. Actually, not only they are traditionally the marks of existence, but they also provide a gateway to liberation. Each of them provides a way through seeing them to liberation. So again, it's not the scope of this talk to talk about those. But right view stays close to those. So to put it another way, you might be suspicious of a view that says there's a fixed and unchanging soul, that when you die, it goes to heaven. So that we can't see that in our own experience. Yeah. So it suggests that we might be a bit suspicious of that. So yeah. yeah, so that's the third one, that right view stays close to this essential experience. Okay, I've got two more here. So fourth one here is, I think I've already really touched on this, that views can be judged, as it were, right when they result from actions which lead to be in accordance with the precepts. So I'll say that a different way. So if we're acting out of a view and it's reflected in loving kindness, truthfulness, calm, and clarity of mind, well, then that suggests that acting through that view, acting with the spectacles of that view, are helping us and aligning ourselves with moving forwards towards enlightenment. So that fourth one is right view accords with the precepts. So finally, when we talk about right view, we've talked about right view and wrong view in this series, but it isn't so much right view in a total, in an abstract way. Right view is what helps us to move along the path towards enlightenment. So it's right or wrong in the sense of what helps us. The Buddha is focused on this. Earlier I said, the Buddha is very reluctant to get into theorizing or metaphysics. He says that's not useful. What's important is to move beyond suffering, and that's his focus. So right view is what helps us along the path to enlightenment. It's what serves the greatest good for ourselves and other people and all beings. Yeah. So just to finish off, well, we've seen that the Buddha clearly saw, when the Buddha had interactions with people, he saw people as individuals. He related to people as individuals. So what he said, the right view that came out of his perfect vision, was particular for that person. So each person had a different conditioning. They've got a different cultural background, maybe a different language, a different set of experiences. So what he taught was particular to that person. And as I said earlier, it's particular to where that person is in their spiritual life. So in a way, this for me draws out that right view. There is going to be a variety of right view. I know this having practiced the Dharma for a long time. There were some time, years and years ago, I won't say how long, there were things that really helped me to move on. But actually, although, I accept those things, they're not so helpful now. Whereas other principles or other ideas are more helpful now. So through our spiritual life, what is helpful changes. And as I said, different people at different times need different teachings. Just a simple example of this is when we're teaching meditation. So I might be here on a Thursday evening teaching the drop-in class, and one person might come to me and say, oh, in this meditation, I feel really sleepy. I just can't keep awake. So I might say, having some experience of meditation, I might say, well, what about keeping your awareness up the top, up in your chest, opening your chest, being aware of the sensations? And that tends, in most cases, to help people be a bit more alert, a bit more awake. So then in the same class, someone might come to me and say, oh, I was really restless. My mind was moving all over the place. Couldn't settle at all. So then I might say, okay, well, when you're meditating, bring your awareness down into the body, the lower body. Maybe feel the floor, feel yourself grounded. Maybe imagine you're a tree with roots going down. So I could go on, but that's something of an illustration that is a different teaching because that's what's appropriate for that person. So that's rather a simple example, but it just illustrates the variety of teachings that are appropriate for different people. So this quality of right view, that it celebrates this variety of approaches, is illustrated in a famous parable. Some of you know the parable of the rain cloud, or the parable of the herbs. This is in one of the Mahayana sutras called the White Lotus Sutra. And it's a lovely parable. I haven't got time to read it here. But really, to sort of just tell the story briefly, it tells the story of the monsoon in India, and some people Katuraja regularly in India. Have you been there in the monsoon, Katuraja? Never. You never have. Maybe that's. So the rain comes down. I understand. I have been there when you've had a heavy rainfall. It is really heavy in India. But what you see is quite quickly all the plants growing. You know, from the very small weeds and small plants to the bushes, the trees, they're all green, and they all grow, and they all grow in their own way. And that's a bit like the Dharma. The Dharma, the key principles of the Dharma nourish all of us. But how we grow and what we need to grow does vary, depending on our conditioning and the time.